Welcome to the All Elite Wrestling Draft on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. A lot of WWE releases that we heard about last week, so we're going to cover 5 of them on this episode. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. Ralph, let's get right down to it. Let's start with the release that happened before all the bulk releases happen, and that is the Revival. A lot of people are speculating that they will be in AEW. People want that dream match with the Young Bucks. We even said that they should even go as far as adding Jim Cornette to the equation. Do you see the Revival in AEW?
Yeah, I really do see them ending up in AEW, especially given the fact that, the Young Bucks have been adamant that one of the things they want to focus on is the tag team division. Not only do they have years of experience in the industry, but they also have the experience of being in the largest organization in terms of professional wrestling. So having that experience, learning in NXT, learning in the WWE, being able to take that experience and translate that into AEW. And, they can also be used in other ways too, being able to groom some of the younger tag teams there that AEW does have. So I think this is probably the most sure bet of anybody that we're going to talk about. I don't see anywhere else where they could. There's other possibilities. New Japan Pro Wrestling could be a possibility. Ring of Honor, maybe a short stint there, but I really think ultimately AEW is where they end up.
I totally agree. I think AEW definitely is where they're going to end up. So much focus on the tag team division, as we talked about in previous episodes. Whether or not they do the dream match with the Young Bucks, whether or not Jim Cornette is there, I'm pretty sure that's probably not going to happen with Jim Cornette. But if not Jim Cornette, you can also tie them with Tully Blanchard or Arn Anderson. I mean, a lot of people make the comparison to the Brain Busters with them. I do like the possible new name, FTR, Fear the Revolt. And I also like their new names outside of WWE, Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood. So I'm going with AEW on this. And that first match with the Bucks, if all goes well and everything is with crowds again, look for that match to happen at All Out. That's where I think that could happen. Next up, we got EC3. This one, he could go back to Impact Wrestling where his career really peaked, or he might go to AEW. There was the Instagram post back in February where Chris Jericho was talking to EC3 in Orlando. Was there some conversation there of saying, hey, when your contract's up, come be All Elite? I don't know. I think he might actually go back to Impact Wrestling.
Yeah, I got to agree. This is probably difficult because when you look at Matt Hardy, I think one of the things that AEW definitely wants to stay away from is being the company that just signs anybody from WWE, especially a guy like him. When you think about it, and like you pointed out, he is definitely somebody who, to this point at least, has peaked in Impact Wrestling. He really made a name for himself outside of the WWE. He had a short run in NXT where he had some, I don't know if I would call it major success, but he was certainly successful. And then they brought him up to the main card and they didn't necessarily utilize him. I think the thing they have to be careful of is signing these guys who had a little bit of buzz in Impact or outside of the WWE, and then, having them transition into WWE and then eventually making their way to AEW. That's very much the same path that a guy like Matt Hardy took. Matt Hardy, while it worked in Impact Wrestling, they tried to do something to that extent in WWE. It didn't necessarily catch on. EC3, it worked in Impact Wrestling. They brought him to WWE. It was somewhat successful in NXT, like I said. And then if they bring those guys to AEW, that's really kind of banking on a very similar character striking hot 3 different times. It didn't necessarily, I don't think the debut for Matt Hardy was done well. I think the confrontation with Jericho got mixed reactions. And I think now what people are starting to realize is that's not going to be for everybody. And they don't want to necessarily be the company who's taking these individuals who peaked 5 or 6 years ago with a gimmick in a small sample set like Impact Wrestling. So if I'm EC3, I'd probably go back to where I know my character is going to work with a crowd as small as it is now in comparison to what it was, where I know it's going to work. And he'll probably go back to Impact, in my opinion, at least for a little while.
Now, here's the thing about I mean, the character EC3 or Ethan Carter III, whatever you want to call him, that character that we saw in Impact Wrestling, it looks like he's deviating himself from that. And if you've seen his Twitter posts and these videos recently, he looks like he's trying to recreate himself. And that might be the best bet. Just take off the EC3 moniker altogether. And maybe he could do that with All Elite Wrestling, because if he keeps the EC3 character now, there's too many comparisons with MJF, I think. So maybe he's trying to do something completely different, and All Elite Wrestling might be able to help him get over that hump. But again, like I said, Impact Wrestling, he had his best run there. People do sometimes recreate themselves in Impact Wrestling before going on to bigger, better things, like whether it's WWE or AEW. So I'm going to say for now, Impact Wrestling. Next one is going to be our female in this episode, and that is Sarah Logan. Now, she didn't quite get the push that some people wish. AEW, a lot of people say the weakest part of AEW is their women's division, so someone that has experience on television could certainly help with that. But I got to be honest, I do not see her being a fit in AEW. I could see her in either Impact, which I would argue has the best women's division outside of WWE, NWA, who has a pretty decent women's division, or she might even go to Ring of Honor, where she had some experience before. I can see one of those three. I don't see her going to Japan and Stardom, but here's the thing. Here's where I'm going with Impact. I'll go with Impact because before she came to WWE, she had this character called Crazy Mary Dobson. She had this white eye, contact lens on one eye, face paint, very crazy. I think Impact Wrestling might be the best fit for her when they have characters like Sue Young and Dark Alley way back when, Laurel Van Ness, Rosemary. They know how to work those like weird characters, even Broken Matt Hardy. Those work best in Impact Wrestling. So maybe she goes there.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially if she's going to try to utilize a character similar to that. I think that with Impact Wrestling, look, it's certainly not the TNA of old. It's certainly much smaller, but sometimes when you have a much smaller crowd like that, it becomes a very niche thing. And a very niche thing can attract a fan base that is going to like or be into something like that. It's very easy to impress a smaller group than it is to impress the masses, like WWE tries to do. And that's why sometimes like a Matt Hardy or a broken Matt Hardy doesn't work with them, because their fan base is so big demographically. There's so many different demographics that they're trying to attract, where if you compare that to Impact Wrestling, where it's a much smaller fan base, sometimes you get over with a small percentage of the fan base week after week after week. Eventually it catches on with everybody there and it works. So yeah, I agree. I think Impact Wrestling is a good landing spot for her.
Let's move on to another tag team that have some ties with the Elite, and that is Luke Gallows and Karl Anderson. Could they be going to All Elite Wrestling? We know they were members of the Bullet Club with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. We did see a tease earlier this week after it was announced that Karl Anderson was released. He did post a video where he saw the return of Machine Gun Anderson, possibly going back to New Japan, and I think that's where he will end up. I think Luke Gallows and Anderson will go back to the Bullet Club, or at least start a story where they're trying to come back to the Bullet Club, but Jay White won't let them. I think they're a better fit in Japan anyway.
Yeah, they were incredibly successful in Japan, so why not go back where it's going to work? Can they go to AEW? Yeah, of course they can. But now when you start talking about potentially adding the Revival, you've got the Young Bucks, you got a really deep tag team division. Now, are they utilizing that tag team division? Some people would suggest not, but the last thing they'd want to do is have all of this young talent, bring in guys that are from WWE and push that young talent back. Can they learn from guys like Gallows and Anderson and the Revival? Yes, of course they can. But you also have to consider, if you're going to take tag teams or more than one tag team, especially a tag team of that caliber that is, very well known in the wrestling industry, you're going to have to push back a lot of your other tag teams. Private Party certainly comes to mind as one of those young tag teams. You've got Jurassic Express, Butcher and the Blade, who they haven't necessarily even started to utilize. I mean, they have them on, or they were having them on TV on a weekly basis, it felt like, but they weren't necessarily winning all that much. So you got to be careful with things like that. Not only that, but you also got to consider this. Kenny Omega and Hangman Page are still the tag team champions.
Yes,
so you got to think that wherever Gallows and Anderson are going to go, they're going to want to be highlighted. I mean, you're not going to go from WWE being in a group with AJ Styles to just going somewhere to, just kind of fit in and teach. If they go to New Japan Pro Wrestling, they're already well known. They were already in the Bullet Club. They were already over. Go where it works. I think they go back to Japan.
Yeah, totally agree there. I'd be interested to see how it would work in New Japan Pro Wrestling if they go back to the Bullet Club, because Karl Anderson was a former leader of the Bullet Club. And before this whole situation started, where they shut down New Japan basically for a long time, Jay White and Kenta were really maybe starting this feud of who would be the leader of the Bullet Club. Now, if Karl Anderson comes in, do they add that to the fire? I'd be very interested to see when that happens, if it happens. But let's go to our last guy in this round of the All Elite Wrestling Draft, and that is Heath Slater. Now, most of his time in WWE was for comedy purposes. AEW definitely has their fair share of comedy wrestlers like Orange Cassidy and Michael Nakazawa, but Heath Slater could be serious too. He could be a good fit in AEW, but I actually see a different approach with him. I actually see him doing the same route as Jinder Mahal and Drew McIntyre, and that is working the indie circuit, getting really jacked up, return to WWE, and becoming a WWE champion. Just like Drew, just like Jinder. 3-man band, everything happens in threes. This is going to happen. Heath Slater will be a WWE champion within the next 5 years. Book it.
I think that's a little bit of a pipe dream. I certainly can see him going and working the indie scene, which I definitely think he's going to do. I think the difference is Jinder Mahal to me was kind of right place, right time. They desperately needed that heel guy. He definitely came back in shape and he worked hard to get back to where he was. Drew McIntyre was always somebody that they saw potential in, and eventually he had to leave WWE to come back in the best shape of his life and really be somebody that could stand out. Heath Slater's interesting because he is certainly somebody that is really good on the mic, I think, in my opinion. But, you haven't necessarily seen that serious side of him. I mean, I think what comes to mind with him is 3-man band and the t-shirt, I Got Kids. I can't really think, he was in Nexus and all that stuff, but, I can't really necessarily think of any serious prominent role that he had in WWE that would help make me think he'd go outside WWE, find some type of success, and then come back and be a champion. I think he's more of like a comedic act to me. So that being said, I think that he works the indie scene. I don't know if there's necessarily one place he's going to stick around in for a prolonged period of time. And, I'm sure at some point, we'll see him in WWE, whether it's like a Royal Rumble entrant here or there. But I can't see him going back and rising to the occasion and winning the championship. So I'm going to say he works the indie scene for a bit.
Yeah, well, stranger things have happened. And if he has to stick to one promotion out of all the major ones, I could actually see him in NWA. Just do the Aaron Stevens route.
Yeah.
I mean, Aaron Stevens or Damian Sandow, he was a comedic wrestler doing the whole Mizdow thing, and now he's killing it in NWA. Maybe Heath Slater just carries that over into NWA. I wouldn't mind that either.
Certainly could, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let us know in the comments, where do you think these guys end up? Do they become All Elite, or do they end up at another promotion? Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.